Michael Schumacher was untouchable in 1994, until he wasn't. Silverstone, British Grand Prix. The most dominant driver of his generation was told to stop racing and report to the pits immediately. The black flag doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about championships or legacy or the fact that you're Michael Bloody Schumacher. But Schumacher kept racing. For lap after lap, he ignored the stewards, ignored his team, ignored the one rule that keeps Formula One from becoming complete chaos. The FIA didn't see a champion making a judgment call. They saw a driver who thought he was bigger than the sport itself. 2 races, gone. Just like that, the man who would become the most successful driver in history learned that Formula One bows to no one. The ban cost him crucial points in a championship fight that would go down to the wire. But more than that, it established something that echoes through the sport today. No driver, no matter how talented, no matter how successful, gets to rewrite the rules. Not even legends get to decide when the race is over. Riccardo Patrese was 24 years old when he lined up for the 1978 Italian Grand Prix. By the end of lap 1, Ronnie Peterson was dying in a hospital bed, and Patrese was being blamed for the carnage that put him there. The start was chaos. Cars everywhere. Nowhere to go. And in the middle of it all, a young Italian driver making a move that would change everything. The footage is still hard to watch. Peterson's Lotus crumpled and burning, while Patrici's car sat relatively unscathed. The Italian fans wanted blood. The media wanted a villain. And the FIA, caught between justice and politics, gave them both. 1 race ban. That was it. But the real punishment lasted decades. Patrese would go on to have a brilliant career, 256 Grand Prix starts, 6 wins, multiple podiums. But he never escaped the shadow of Monza 1978 and the man who died because racing is dangerous. And sometimes that danger finds the wrong person at exactly the wrong moment. The ban was lifted, but the guilt never was. Yuji Ide thought he was living the dream. First Japanese driver in Formula One since 1987. A seat with Super Aguri, the whole nation watching. He lasted 4 races, not because of politics or money or bad luck, because the FIA looked at his driving and decided he was going to kill someone. The crashes weren't spectacular. They were worse than that. They were predictable. ID spinning at every circuit, hitting barriers that shouldn't be hittable, making mistakes that professional drivers simply don't make. Formula One had seen pay drivers before. Rich kids buying their way into cockpits they couldn't handle. But this was different. This was a driver who fundamentally didn't understand how fast Formula One cars go or how little room for error exists at this level. After 4 races and countless incidents, the FIA did something almost unprecedented. They revoked his super license. Not for 1 race, not for the season. Forever. I'd returned to Japan and had a perfectly respectable career in domestic racing. But Formula One had made its judgment. Some dreams are too dangerous to pursue. The sport that prides itself on finding the fastest drivers in the world had found one who simply wasn't fast enough to survive. Romain Grosjean was supposed to be the future of French motorsport. Talented, ambitious, fast enough to challenge for podiums on his day. Instead, he became the man who nearly killed Fernando Alonso. Spa 2012, the most dangerous corner on the most dangerous circuit on the calendar. Grosjean squeezed Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton had nowhere to go, and suddenly 15 cars were flying through the air in a shower of carbon fiber and twisted metal. Alonso's Ferrari missed his head by inches. Literally inches. The kind of near miss that makes you question whether racing cars should be going 180 miles per hour into a corner where there's no runoff and nowhere to hide. The FIA didn't hesitate. 1 race ban. Immediate effect. Not because Grosjean was malicious, but because in Formula One, intentions don't matter when the consequences can be fatal. Grosjean came back and had a solid career. Won races, fought for championships, proved he belonged at this level. But Spa 2012 followed him everywhere. A reminder that in Formula One, your worst moment defines you just as much as your best. He learned to live with it, because in this sport, that's all you can do. Eddie Irvine was chaos in a racing suit. Fearless, unpredictable. The kind of driver who made every race more interesting just by being there. Brazil 1994 was supposed to be his breakthrough moment. First podium, proving he belonged among the sport's elite, showing the world that Northern Ireland could produce Formula One drivers. Instead, it became the day Formula One decided he was too dangerous to race. The crash happened so fast that even now, watching the footage, it's hard to understand how it started. Irvine, fighting for position, making a move that was either brilliant or insane depending on your perspective. Contact, cars spinning, the kind of multi-car carnage that makes stewards reach for the biggest penalties they can find. 3 races, gone. Just when his career was starting to take take off, just when Jordan was becoming competitive, just when everything was coming together. But Irvin came back harder than before. Won races, challenged for championships, became exactly the kind of driver Formula One claims to want. Fearless, committed, willing to risk everything for victory. The ban didn't break him. It made him understand that fearless and reckless aren't the same thing, and in Formula One, learning that difference can mean the difference between legend and footnote. Nigel Mansell was Britain's last hope in 1989, Ferrari's golden boy, the man who could finally bring a championship back to Maranello after years of disappointment. Portugal, Estoril, a circuit where careers are made and broken on the same afternoon. Mansell was flying, hunting down championship points, driving like a man possessed by the ghost of every British driver who'd fallen short before him. Then came the black flag. Technical infringement, immediate disqualification, report to the pits now. Not negotiable, not appealable, not something you ignore because you're Nigel Mansell and you've got a championship to win. But ignore it, he did. Lap after lap. The marshals waving that flag like they were trying to save his life, while Mansell kept racing like he couldn't see them. The FIA had seen this before. Drivers who thought passion could override procedure, who believed that wanting something badly enough made the rules optional. One race ban. Swift, decisive, final. The kind of punishment that reminds everyone watching that Formula One is bigger than any individual dream. No matter how desperately that dream is pursued, Mansell would get his championship eventually, but not that year, and not by pretending the sports authority didn't apply to him. Sometimes the biggest lions need to learn they're still in a cage. Before Mika Hakkinen became the Iceman, before he won 2 world championships and defined what it meant to be McLaren fast, he was just another young driver making young driver mistakes. Hockenheim 1994. Practice session, nothing on the line except pride and maybe a few tenths of a second that wouldn't matter come Sunday. But in Formula One, every tenth matters. Every session counts. Every lap is an audition for your entire future. The crash was massive, the kind that makes everyone in the paddock stop what they're doing and look toward the medical helicopter. Hockenen's McLaren destroyed beyond recognition, while the man himself lay unconscious in a car that might have become his coffin. He survived barely, but the FIA had seen enough. Reckless driving, endangering other competitors, the kind of behavior that gets your license suspended before you even wake up in the hospital. One race ban, not for malice, not for ignoring flags, but for driving like someone who didn't understand that Formula One cars can kill you if you don't respect them. The ban gave Hakkinen time to think, time to heal, time to understand that speed without wisdom is just a faster way to die. When he came back, something had changed. The raw speed was still there, but tempered now with the kind of cold calculation that would make him unstoppable. The crash broke his body, but the ban rebuilt his mind. Hans Heyer wanted to race in Formula One so badly that he forgot you have to qualify first. Germany 1977. Hockenheim, his home circuit. Thousands of German fans hoping to see their countrymen compete at the highest level. But hoping doesn't make you fast enough. And wanting something doesn't mean you deserve it. Heyer's lap times weren't close. Not close to the pole position, not close to the back of the grid, not close to anything resembling Formula One pace. The stewards looked at his times and did what stewards do. They told him to go home. But instead of packing up and admitting defeat, Heyer did something unprecedented. When the green flag dropped, there he was, lined up with the rest of the field like he belonged there. He lasted one lap. One lap of living his Formula One dream before reality caught up with him and dragged him back to where he started. The FIA didn't just ban him from the race. They banned him from Formula One forever. Not for being slow, not for being dangerous, but for thinking the rules didn't apply to him. Racing is built on integrity. Everyone has to qualify. Everyone has to earn their place. Everyone has to prove they belong. Heyer tried to skip that process and discovered that some shortcuts lead nowhere. He never raced in Formula One again, but for one lap, one beautiful, delusional lap, he was exactly where he'd always dreamed of being. Austria 1982, the Österreichring, where careers go to die and legends are born in the same afternoon. Eliseo Salazar was fighting for points, maybe a podium, the kind of result that could change everything for a driver from Chile trying to prove he belonged in Formula One. Nelson Piquet was fighting for a championship. The Brazilian master, smooth as silk, calculating every move like a chess grandmaster who happened to drive racing cars. The collision happened at turn 2. Salazar, diving for an overtake that might or might not have been there. Piquet, holding his line like champions do. Physics did the rest. But this wasn't just any crash. This was Nelson Piquet, furious and humiliated, climbing out of his destroyed car and marching towards Salazar like a man planning violence. The footage is legendary. Piquet, still in his helmet, grabbing Salazar and shaking him while 100,000 Austrian fans watched one of the sport's greatest drivers lose his mind. The FIA acted swiftly. One race ban for dangerous driving, effective immediately. Not because the stewards cared about Piquet's wounded pride, but because Formula One cars aren't weapons, and drivers who use them like weapons don't get to keep racing. Salazar served his ban and came back, but something had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by the knowledge that one mistake had turned him from a promising driver into a cautionary tale. He never won a race, never stood on a podium, never became the champion he might have been. Jean Barra was old school, from the era when racing drivers were gladiators first and diplomats never, when disputes were settled with fists instead of lawyers, and passion mattered more than politics. Monaco, 1959, the most glamorous race on the calendar, where every move is magnified and every mistake becomes legend. Barra's Ferrari was handling like a shopping cart. The setup completely wrong, his race ruined before it started. But this wasn't about the car. This was about respect, about being heard, about a driver who'd risked his life for Ferrari demanding answers from people who'd never been fast enough to understand the questions. The argument started in the garage and moved to the paddock, voices rising, tempers flaring, until suddenly Barra's fist connected with his team manager's jaw in front of photographers, officials, and half the racing world. The FIA didn't hesitate. Banned from multiple Grands Prix, his relationship with Ferrari destroyed, his reputation in tatters, not for being slow, not for crashing, but for forgetting that Formula One is still, ultimately, a business. Behra raced elsewhere, won elsewhere, proved his talent on other stages, but Formula One had moved on without him, evolved past the era when passion and violence were considered the same thing. He died racing at Avis later that year, still fast, still fearless, still convinced that racing was worth any price. Some prices are too high, even for dreams. Jean-Pierre Jarier was blessed with the kind of natural speed that can't be taught, bought, or replicated. In the right car, on the right day, he could make Formula One look easy. The problem was, every other day. 1978 found Jarier bouncing between teams, burning bridges faster than he could build them, developing a reputation as the kind of driver who was simultaneously brilliant and impossible, fast in qualifying, unpredictable in races, dangerous when things didn't go his way. The technical violations came first. Small things, shortcuts that saved seconds but cost credibility. Then came the dangerous driving, the kind of moves that made other drivers question whether sharing a track with him was worth the risk. The FIA had seen drivers like this before, talented enough to deserve a chance, reckless enough to waste it, stubborn enough to keep making the same mistakes until someone forced them to stop. The ban was comprehensive, not just one race, not just a slap on the wrist, but a statement that talent without discipline was worthless in a sport where everyone else's life depended on your judgment. Jarier raced elsewhere, won elsewhere, proved his speed on other stages, but Formula One had moved on, evolved past the era when raw talent was enough to excuse dangerous behavior. He watched from the sidelines as drivers with half his natural ability built careers he should have had, knowing that somewhere along the way, he'd chosen speed over wisdom. In Formula One, that choice always ends the same way. Rain Weisel thought he understood Formula One. Fast cars, brave drivers, the kind of sport where split-second decisions separate champions from casualties. What he didn't understand was that some decisions aren't yours to make. The early 1970s were Formula One's deadliest era. Drivers died regularly, safety was an afterthought, and yellow flags were often the only thing standing between competition and catastrophe. When those flags appeared, you slowed down. Not because you wanted to, but because someone ahead might be dying. Wiesel saw yellow flags as obstacles to overcome rather than warnings to heed. Race after race, he treated caution periods like personal challenges, ignoring marshals who were frantically trying to protect him from dangers he couldn't see. The final incident was typical. Yellow flags waving, Wiesel charging through at racing speed, missing a stranded car by inches while marshals dove for safety. The kind of near miss that makes everyone realize how quickly racing can become tragedy. The ban was swift and decisive, not because the stewards enjoyed punishing drivers, but because Formula One was finally learning that some risks weren't worth taking. Wiesel served his suspension and returned with a new understanding of what those flags flags meant, not suggestions from overcautious officials, but lifelines thrown by people who'd seen too many drivers ignore warnings that might have saved them. He raced more carefully after that, lived longer because of it, and learned that sometimes the bravest thing a driver can do is slow down. Andrea de Cesaris should have been a champion. Tall, handsome, naturally gifted with the kind of speed that made team owners write checks and fans hold their breath. Instead, he became the most expensive driver in Formula One history, not because of his salary, but because of what he destroyed. Cars that should have finished races ended up as twisted metal. Races that should have been won became exercises in damage control. Championships that should have been possible became impossible because de Cesaris couldn't keep his car pointing in the right direction. The crashes weren't malicious. They weren't even particularly spectacular. They were just constant, predictable, the kind of inevitable disasters that made mechanics cringe every time he climbed into a cockpit. Teams tried everything. Different cars, different engineers, different approaches to managing a driver who could qualify on pole position and crash out on the formation lap. Nothing worked because the problem wasn't mechanical. Eventually, the team stopped calling, not because de Cesaris wasn't fast, but because speed doesn't matter if you can't finish races. The FIA never officially banned him, but Formula One banned itself from him, closing ranks around a sport that couldn't afford his particular brand of expensive chaos. He kept racing in other series, kept winning in other championships, kept proving that his speed was real, even if his judgment wasn't. But Formula One had made its decision. Some drivers are too costly to trust, no matter how fast they go in a straight line. Stefan Johansson arrived in Formula One carrying baggage from the junior formulas. Not mechanical baggage, not financial problems, but the kind of reputation that makes team principals nervous and stewards pay extra attention. The Formula 3000 ban had been harsh but fair. Dangerous driving, poor judgment, the kind of incident that makes everyone question whether a driver has the maturity to compete at the highest level. But Formula One was supposed to be different. Fresh start, new teams, the chance to prove that lessons had been learned and wisdom had been gained. Johansson drove like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. The scrutiny was intense. Every move analyzed, every mistake magnified, every racing incident viewed through the lens of past transgressions. Fair or not, justified or not, Johansson raced under a microscope that other drivers never faced. When the controversial moments came, and they always did, the stewards remembered his history. Close calls that might have been warnings for other drivers became penalties for him. Racing incidents that might have been forgotten became evidence of patterns. Johansson had a respectable Formula One career despite the constant pressure. Podium finishes, point-scoring drives, moments of brilliance that proved his talent was real. But he never escaped the feeling that he was racing with one hand tied behind his back. Formula One had given him a second chance, but not a clean slate. In a sport where reputation is everything, some stains never wash out completely. The talent was there, the speed was there, but trust, once broken, takes more than fast lap times to rebuild. Jean-Louis Schlesser thought he was getting the opportunity of a lifetime. Ferrari needed a substitute driver for the 1988 Italian Grand Prix, and somehow, impossibly, they'd chosen him. One race, one chance to prove he belonged at the highest level, one afternoon to show the world that Jean-Louis Schlesser could handle a Formula One car at Monza, the fastest circuit on the calendar. Instead, he showed them why substitute drivers usually stay substitutes. The incident happened so fast that even watching the replay doesn't make it clear exactly what went wrong. Schlesser's Ferrari, out of control at 180 miles per hour, collecting Ayrton Senna's McLaren in the kind of crash that changes championship fights and ends dreams. Senna was leading the race, leading the championship, driving with the kind of precision that separated him from every other driver on the grid, until Schlesser turned him into a passenger in his own destruction. The FIA's response was unprecedented. Not just a ban from the remainder of the season, but a permanent exclusion from Formula One. No appeals, no second chances, no recognition that accidents happen in racing. Schlesser had destroyed more than cars. He'd destroyed McLaren's championship, Senna's momentum, and his own future in a sport that doesn't forgive drivers who take out legends. He raced elsewhere, won elsewhere, proved his talent on other stages. But Formula One had made its judgment in the wreckage at Monza. Some substitutions are permanent, and some mistakes eliminate all future opportunities. Nelson Piquet Sr. thought he was fighting for something bigger than himself in 1982. Not just better safety conditions, not just more money, but the principle that drivers deserved a voice in their own survival. The strike talk started quietly. Drivers huddled in hotel rooms and motorhomes, discussing whether they had the courage to collectively refuse to race until their demands were met. Piquet, never one to back down from a fight, became their unofficial leader. But when the moment came, when the green flag was supposed to drop and the drivers were supposed to stay in their garages, most of them blinked. The money was too good, the competition too fierce, the fear of being replaced too real. Piquet found himself alone, the face of a rebellion that had collapsed before it started, holding demands that suddenly seemed naive rather than revolutionary. The FIA was prepared to make an example, not of all the drivers who'd considered striking, but of the one who'd pushed hardest, spoken loudest, and refused to apologize for believing drivers deserved better. The threatened ban never materialized, politics and pragmatism prevailing over punishment. But Piquet learned something that day about the limits of solidarity in a sport built on individual competition. You can't lead people who aren't willing to follow, and you can't fight a war when your army disappears at the first sign of real conflict. The strike failed, but the lesson remained. In Formula One, even champions are replaceable. Sebastian Buemi was supposed to be gaining experience in 2009, learning how Formula One worked, understanding the rhythms of race weekends, making the mistakes that young drivers make before they become champions. Instead, he almost killed someone in a pit stop. The release was catastrophic. Buemi's Toro Rosso launching from its pit box directly into the path of another car traveling at full pit lane speed, missing a fatal collision by inches that measured in luck rather than skill. Pit lanes aren't racetracks. They're workplaces where mechanics trust that drivers will follow procedures designed to keep everyone alive. When those procedures break down, when drivers become projectiles in spaces designed for precision, people die. The 10-place grid penalty was the smallest part of Buemi's punishment. The real consequence was the conversation that followed, the FIA officials making it clear that one more incident like this would end his Formula One career before it properly started. Formula One had seen too many drivers who confused aggression with competence, who thought that racing rules were suggestions to be ignored when convenient. Buemi wasn't one of them, but the sport couldn't afford to find out by accident. He learned from the mistake, developed into a solid driver, had a respectable career despite the early scare. But the incident followed him, a reminder that in Formula One, your worst moment can define you more than your best. Some lessons come with warnings attached, and some warnings come with expiration dates. Nobuhiko Kawamoto never climbed into a Formula One cockpit, never qualified for a Grand Prix, never risked his life at 200 miles per hour for the chance at glory. But when Honda's relationship with Formula One collapsed in spectacular fashion, he paid a price that actual drivers never faced. The engines were disasters, unreliable, underpowered, the kind of mechanical embarrassments that turned competitive teams into mobile chicanes. But this wasn't just about performance. This was about Honda's entire approach to Formula One, their attitude toward partners, their respect for the sport itself. Behind the scenes, the politics were toxic. Team agreements broken, financial commitments ignored, the kind of corporate behavior that makes Formula One question whether some manufacturers deserve to participate. The FIA's response was unprecedented. Not a ban on drivers or cars, but a revocation of Honda's right to supply engines to Formula One teams. Kawamoto, as the executive responsible for Honda's motorsport programs, became the face of corporate failure. No racing license was involved, no sporting penalties applied, but the message was clear. Formula One partnerships are built on trust, and Honda had burned through theirs. Kawamoto's career survived, Honda eventually returned to Formula One, and the sport moved on, but the precedent remained. In Formula One, everyone is accountable, even the people who never leave the pit wall. Some bans are about driving, and some are about everything that makes driving possible. James Hunt arrived in Formula One with a reputation that preceded him like a warning label. Not for being slow, not for lacking talent, but for being the kind of driver who treated racing like a contact sport. The Formula 3 ban had been spectacular. Multiple incidents, dangerous driving, the kind of behavior that made stewards reach for the harshest penalties available. Hunt served his punishment and learned his lessons. But lessons don't erase memories. Formula One was supposed to be different. Professional teams, serious money, the kind of environment where past indiscretions could be forgotten if present performance was strong enough. Hunt drove like his life depended on proving that theory correct. But the whispers never stopped. Every racing incident scrutinized, every aggressive move questioned, every contact between Hunt and another driver viewed through the lens of his junior Formula reputation. The threatened bans never materialized materialized because Hunt was too talented to ignore and too careful to repeat his past mistakes. But he raced under constant scrutiny, every move analyzed by officials who remembered what he'd been capable of when young and reckless. Hunt won races, won a championship, proved that redemption was possible in a sport that usually doesn't believe in second chances. But he never escaped the feeling that he was racing with a target on his back. Some drivers have to prove they belong. Others have to prove they've changed. Hunt spent his entire career doing both, knowing that one mistake could resurrect a past he'd worked so hard to escape.